Yeah, let's let people in whenever you're ready. Hey, welcome everybody. I think folks are coming in now. We're going to be in shortly. We'll give everyone another minute or two to arrive, but please feel free to say hello in the chat, share if you want to share your name, share anything about your organization or where you're coming from. And please do try to stay on mute during the presentation. We'll have time for questions at the end.
So the discussion around replacement theory, introduction, insight, and then effective.
Okay, I think we'll get started now. So as I mentioned, please try to stay on mute while we're giving the presentation. If you have questions, you can enter them into the chat, and we'll try to, if they're easy to respond to in the chat, try to respond well. We're giving the presentation, and then we are going to look back at the chat for questions at the end. As I think you had noticed when you came in, we are recording this so that we can provide it to anyone who isn't able to attend today. So I think with all of that said, we'll get started and move forward. So I'm your presenter today. My name is Catherine Stevens. I'm the Director of Grants at Mass Humanities. My contact information is below. Mass Humanities, as I hope you know, we create opportunities for the people of Massachusetts to transform their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. And we do this through grants, through programs and partnerships with nonprofits around Massachusetts. And our work is made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Mass Cultural Council, and the generosity of our donors. Our Expand Massachusetts Stories initiative, which is the focus of this webinar, is made possible with support from the Barr Foundation. Part of a team of program officers, so my colleagues Jen Atwood and Toya Bosworth are also here today helping us run things behind the scene. And I also want to thank our interpreters here today, Elizabeth and Iris from Partners Interpreting, who are helping us make this program ASL accessible. So thank you to everyone else who is here today helping move this presentation forward. So I am going to speak about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants today and walk through some eligibility and walk through the application. But I should also say that a great way to assess your project's eligibility, get a sense of its potential fit for this grant line is to make an appointment with myself or one of my fellow program officers. All this information is in the grant guidelines on our website, but we want to make it available here. You can book appointments with us. You can also, of course, ask questions over email and then access all the information about the grant on our website. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. I'm going to give an overview of the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. A lot of this will be review from information we went over in a webinar that we gave on February 16th. We walked through all of the grant opportunities. So I hope this is a review for you. It helps you feel confident. And then I will go over some key application questions. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do and don't fund, particularly some areas that I think might be relevant based on the conversations that we've already had with applicants. And we'll talk about some of the documents that are required for the application, as well as some that are optional. and then we'll have time for some question and answer. And as always, if you've applied to many grants before, if you've applied to Mass Humanities grants before, I hope that if we say things you already know, that confirms your readiness to apply. And of course, if you're new to Mass Humanities and new to grant writing, we hope that this is helpful and helps you feel confident in applying for our grants. So to get us started, Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. These grants support projects that collect, interpret, and share narratives about the Commonwealth, emphasizing the voices and experiences that have gone unrecognized or been excluded from public conversation. These grants support a really wide variety of project types. We always learn about new project types through this grant line, but we see a lot of oral history projects, a lot of community-based exhibits, we see digital versions of community exhibits or oral history exhibits. We also see new interpretations of maybe existing exhibits or collections. We fund short documentary films. Those are films that can be completed during the grant period and are typically in a 15 to 30-minute range and then shared publicly through screenings and discussions. And we support facilitated discussions of many kinds. There's a lot more types of grants that we support. A great place to look at the kind of work that we fund is through the link that is on the slide and that we will be dropping into the chat. This is a list of the grants that we awarded last year to Expand Massachusetts Stories. And the image on this slide is from a grant that we awarded to Expand Massachusetts Stories in 2021. The project is now called Somos Latinos, A Journey to Lawrence and Beyond. And it is a project to create an exhibit and bring it to the Lawrence Heritage State Park to share the history of Latino communities in Lawrence. And so this image is from a community discussion and story collection event where community members brought objects or images that help them tell their story of either growing up in Lawrence or coming to Lawrence. And those conversations and those images are being part of the development of that final exhibit. So that's just one example of the kind of projects that we fund, but I think it's always great to be able to share the work that current grantees are doing. This is just an overview, a snapshot of the grant itself. This webinar is specific to the Expand Massachusetts Stories open track, where there are a couple of rules that are specific to that track, so we'll be focusing on that. So the awards are up to $20,000. For open track grants, there is a matching requirement. They need to be at least equally matched with the amount they request of Mass Humanities, and 10% of that match needs to be in cash. We will be going over all of that, details about matching, how to calculate your match, how to understand what is in cash versus in kind tomorrow's webinar on budgets. So this is a two-part webinar, and really we'll focus on that in much more detail tomorrow. The application process is open now, so you can be completing an application right now. Those applications are due May 22nd, so about a month from now. The application requires, ballpark about 1,000 to maybe 2,500 words, again, depending on your writing style. There is an Excel budget sheet, which again, we will focus on tomorrow. You'll be uploading resumes from key project team members. There's a humanities advisor statement, which I'll touch on today. And then also sample materials or letters of commitment where we'll speak a little bit about that. An overview of the grant itself. I'm going to walk through the eligibility requirements. So all nonprofit government organizations and state or federally recognized tribes that serve Massachusetts residents are eligible to apply. Fiscally sponsored projects are also welcome to apply. Mass Humanities does not award funding to individuals, just to know that. Fiscally sponsored projects need to have a signed fiscal sponsor agreement uploaded to the application. So if your project is fiscally sponsored, just make sure that you have that agreement and that you upload it to your application. And I'll speak a little bit more about those later in the webinar. Applicants also need to have completed any past Mass Humanities grant project, so a project-based grant, and submitted their final report 1 week before the application is due. There are 3 exceptions to this rule. So if you have a currently open 2023 Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant, that is fine. If your organization is fiscally sponsoring more than one project, that's also fine too. And then colleges and universities can have more than one grant open at a time if those grants are for different departments or institutes. I'm going to shift and go briefly over what work EMS grants do not fund. Again, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later. You can fund lobbying or advocacy projects, creation of professional art or artistic performances, and that does include creative writing, creative nonfiction, as well as scripted film. So that's non-documentary based film where there are scripted scenes. We don't fund direct social service, profit making or fundraising projects, capital improvement, construction and restoration, and also work that takes place before the award date. So any work that might be happening related to your project, if it happens before the award date in September, that we cannot fund. We'll go over some more of these categories as well at tomorrow's budget webinar. So that's our overview. And now we're going to dive into some of the key application questions. So looking a little bit more closely at what we ask in the application. These are the key, we say, are narrative questions in the application. Right, places in the application where you will be writing the most about your project and describing it for readers. I'm going to focus on the Expand Massachusetts Stories question, the project narrative question, and a new question we added this year, which is optional, the methods and research question. The other questions, your work plan and timeline, outreach and publicity, and your project team, in many ways, all of those questions flow from your answers to particularly the project narratives and the methods and research questions. So what you write there just needs to back up what you're saying in the project narrative. So we're not going to touch on those in great detail. So this is your Expand Massachusetts Stories question. So I'm just gonna go through what's in each question and then give a few tips or words of advice when it comes to answering them. So with this question, we provide sort of a set of sub questions, and these are here to try to guide you in your writing so you know what we're looking for. And we want to know what stories the project will find, explore, or share and interpret, and how that project will contribute to a more inclusive understanding of Massachusetts. We want to know why the project will be relevant to residents of Massachusetts, and then thinking about participants and audiences, thinking about what people who participate in the project will learn that they might not already know. When thinking about this question, when going to answer it, think about it as your opportunity to explain the why of your project, to make the case. Always being specific is better than being general. The better you can define the story that you want to surface or share, the easier it will be for reviewers to understand your project. So I will say this probably a couple other times, that being specific is really helpful. The other question we ask, what will participants learn, is an opportunity for you to shift from telling us the what about your project, telling us how it will have an impact on communities. So to think about if there are participants in your project, what is going to change for them as a part of either coming to a final event or taking part in the project itself. So this is your opportunity to explain the impact of the project in terms of participants' experiences and in terms of its benefit to the public. The next key question on the application is your project narrative question. So this is where you tell us what your project is about, what you will try to create, and who is involved. We ask you, what are the final events, programs, materials, or experiences that your project will deliver? When or where people will access them? How humanities subjects or methods will be important to the project and participants' experiences? And what role, if possible, do people or communities represented in the project have in project design or implementation? So when answering that question, a couple of things to know. First and foremost is that Mass Humanities Expand Massachusetts Stories grants are project-based, meaning they aim to deliver a final series or event or exhibit, right? They are aiming to create something. They can't be an assemblage of a lot of different work that you do. that will certainly fit into your organization's mission. You're trying to deliver something, and then naming what you're going to deliver in this point. As always, when describing those deliverables, be as specific as possible. Another way to think about this is to ask the question, we're awarded a grant, how will we know that our project is complete, right? When we have completed 6 sessions, when we have completed an exhibit, when all of the stories are up on our website, right? Thinking about your deliverables in those terms, how we'll be able to say that this project is complete. As you noticed, we ask how will people access these final deliverables? And that's one way of considering that projects need to benefit the public. They should be free or low cost to participants. There shouldn't be a sort of a high membership fee. They shouldn't be internal to your organization. We need to benefit a public and free or low cost. Finally, we ask a question about the way that communities whose stories are represented are part of the project, if at all possible. So if the community is creating the project itself, right, if you are the community representing your story, how you are working together to do that, if you're co-designing a project with the community, right, being able to speak to that co-design process in your project narrative. So we added this question on methods and research. This is an opportunity for particularly projects that are engaging in interviews or oral histories to describe their process. Also projects where team members are doing significant research to be able to describe how they will conduct that research. There are many approaches to story collection, and so we recognize that, and this is the opportunity for your organization to describe your process. There are requirements in the grant guidelines and recommendations for oral history and story collection projects, so you'll want to look at those before answering this question. There are some standard best practices available if you're new to doing this kind of work. The Oral History Association has its own list of best practices from 2018. They also recently published guidelines for social justice oral history work, and that might interest some of your organizations. You might be borrowing from those best practices and adjusting them to your own work. You might also have practices and methods developed by your organization or your community. And so in this section, you can describe those, and you can describe any of as well that co-creation you are doing with the people whose stories are represented. So those are those key application questions. As I've said, work plans and timelines, project team members, all of that really responds to and flows from your answers there. So I'm not going to go into each of those in great detail because we would be here all afternoon if we walk through every question. I want to talk now about some things that we do and don't fund and some common places where we have questions about that. So to go back to our list of what we do and do not fund. 2 key categories I'm going to talk about today are lobbying and advocacy projects, and then the creation of art or artistic performances. So when we talk about lobbying or advocacy projects, you'll see this language specifically in the guidelines that funds cannot be used for lobbying or advocacy projects for specific public policies or legislation, or the promotion of particular political, religious, or ideological points of view. And of course, the question we always get is, what does that mean? We know that many of your organizations are involved in advocating for communities, and that might be the community whose story you are surfacing. So what does this kind of requirement mean for your organization or your project? So does it mean that you cannot engage political questions? No, it means that you can engage political questions when your projects aim to explore the possibilities and limitations or potential gains or possible losses of any political choice, right? So you're not simply endorsing a political choice, rather you're explaining possibilities and limitations of any choice, gains or possible losses of any choice. Projects can engage political questions when they emphasize inquiry, evidence, and multiple experiences or perspectives And multiple perspectives means looking at an issue from more than one position or set of experiences in order to understand it better. And as Expand Massachusetts Stories grants emphasize particularly positions, communities that are not often heard when considering a question. The multiple perspectives doesn't mean a very simplistic pro or con, left or right, which you can kind of get just about anywhere today. Rather, it's a deeper, nuanced understanding of any question by surfacing the experiences of multiple people. In practice and projects, this can look like projects engaging political and policy questions, but not prescribing particular political actions to participants or audiences. Speakers and participants can share their perspectives on political questions, but the project as a whole isn't endorsing a specific policy or legislative agenda. And so someone coming to an event will know that they are there to learn and make their own choice, as opposed to being told what to vote for or what to advocate for. Finally, grant deliverables are not created by your organization for specific use in a policy campaign. So an audience would understand the difference between your project and any policy work that your organization does. So those things are very clearly separate in the way anyone encounters the final parts of your project. We also do not fund the creation of professional art or artistic performances. And of course, we know many projects engage in the arts, and we often say that the arts and the humanities are strongest together. So what does this mean in terms of what mass humanities can fund? We can fund public engagement that contributes to a work of art, such as community discussions and story collection and interpretation. So really, any of those kinds of story collection and public engagement work that I described at the beginning of the presentation when I listed the kinds of projects that we fund, if that is part of a project where eventually there will be a work of art associated with it, our funds can support that community engagement and story collection work. We simply cannot fund the creation of the art, the fabrication of the art, or the artist's work to fabricate it. We can also fund public engagement with completed works of art. So a discussion of a completed piece, contextualization of a completed piece. I'm going to move now to talking about the documents that are in the application that you will be asked to upload. This is a list within a list. So there's a set of required documents, and then there are some optional documents. So I'll talk through each of these. The first I'll talk through is the Humanities Advisor Statement. Then we'll talk about resumes. I'll remind everyone that the completed budget template is required, but again, we will be focusing on that a bit more tomorrow. And then I'll talk a little bit about fiscal sponsor agreements as well, with the reminder that that requirement applies only to fiscally sponsored projects. There is a Humanities Advisor Statement required for the project. So I'll talk a little bit about who that person is, who your Humanities Advisor is. So Humanities Advisors contribute to projects with their deep knowledge of humanities subjects or methods. And they are recognized by peers for their expertise or by a community as a bearer of its knowledge and traditions. Humanities advisors do not need to necessarily be from outside of your organization, though often they are outside experts, and it really depends on your organization, your project, and what you are trying to accomplish. The definitions that we have for humanities are also available in the grant guidelines, and we try to create a definition that names some traditional fields, but also creates room for organizations to be able to put the humanities into their own words. There are multiple ways for advisors to demonstrate their humanities expertise. Some might have an advanced degree in a humanities or applied humanities field or a methodology that is relevant to a project. So that might just be the advanced degree route to demonstrating expertise. But some might not have that advanced degree and yet have a track record of being sought out as an expert who maybe writes, speaks on a humanities topic or method. Others might have a track record of being recognized by a community as a bearer of its knowledge and traditions. So that person, who again may already be part of your project team or maybe someone you're currently seeking, writes a statement where they speak to their expertise, how it will support the project, and how they see the project contributing to the Expand Massachusetts Stories initiative. So you could think about that advisor statement as an opportunity for your advisor to highlight the humanities focus of the project, to confirm its alignment with the EMS initiative, and to show what they know. It is also their opportunity to demonstrate their expertise and experience, and that can be particularly helpful for humanities advisors who are coming from traditions outside of the academic humanities, but nonetheless have been asked many times to speak on a topic and can in their writing demonstrate their expertise. As always, consult with your humanities advisor before they write their letters, particularly if there's someone who's not part of your organization. You want to make sure that you agree on how they will serve the project and how their expertise will ensure its success. You will also be asked to upload resumes of major project personnel. So major personnel will always include project directors and humanities advisors. There might be other members of your projects that are essential for its success. That will vary project to project, so we don't provide a list here. Another thing you can consider is if there are project members whose work Mass Humanities is providing significant funding for relative to your project's costs, that's probably a good person to include among the resumes. But again, it varies depending on the type of project. So make sure that if someone's expertise is really essential for the project, and you want to demonstrate the excellent expertise that is on your project, to upload those resumes. It should be 2 pages per resume at the maximum, so one to 2 pages. You will need to combine all of those into one document. The application form that we have only allows you to upload one document in a space, so you need to gather all the resumes on your own computer, combine them into a document, and then upload that one document. I'm going to shift now to fiscal sponsor agreements. So these are required if your project is fiscally sponsored. So fiscal sponsors receive and manage grant funds, checks or direct deposits for the grant. If you're awarded the grant, will go to the sponsor. In the application, you will have a place to enter this fiscal sponsor's tax ID and contact information. So just double check and make sure those are correct. If you are awarded a grant, that mailing address will receive the grant award. And then in addition to providing that tax ID and mailing address, you'll be asked to provide your fiscal sponsor agreement. In the application, we have links to a sample agreement, and you can use that as a template if you don't already have an agreement with your fiscal sponsor. But you can also use your own form. If you already have an agreement and a relationship, you can use a form that you have, or you can use one that is a better fit than the sample that we provide. What's important is that agreements describe the responsibilities of the parties involved, your project and the sponsor, and to delineate the project work that is done by the applicant and the financial management and accountability for ensuring tax-exempt status. That is the responsibility of the fiscal sponsor. I'm going to quickly mention these additional optional materials that are really dependent on your project type and the relationships in your project. Letters of commitment are important if your project depends on a partnership. So we recommend uploading a letter from the partner that speaks to their agreement to partner on the project and what they are providing. So for example, if your project is partnering with a community center where youth are learning video and audio recording skills, and they will be doing some of the video and audio recording on your project, a letter from that partner would be important for the project. Again, those are That is a situation where you will need to combine, if you have multiple letters, everything into one document. You can also upload existing materials if your project is building on something that already exists. So providing access to a sample of those materials is important. So if your project is building on existing oral histories, providing a link or sample to access them. Or if your project is reinterpreting an existing exhibit, you're providing some kind of link or access to the existing work. For film projects, short documentary films, if you are creating the film in the grant period, a link to any work samples that you have is recommended. If you are seeking funds for screenings and discussions of an existing documentary film, providing a link to the existing film and any necessary passwords is something we ask in the application. There is also a space for additional uploads. Maybe we didn't think of something you need to share, and so we do make a space for that. I will always say that more is not always more with an additional upload field. You want to make sure that you're putting forward the most important things for someone to know about your project. If there's too much in any field like that, it can be very hard for someone to pull out, the really important and relevant information. So do use that additional upload area intentionally. Okay, well, that is the conclusion of the steps through the webinar. And so we're going to open it up to questions now, and I'm going to open up the chat that I know has been moving quickly while I speak. And I will maybe ask my colleagues if there are some common questions I can try to answer while we're here.
Hey, Catherine, I can prompt you a couple of questions we had in the chat already. One of them was if they've never worked with a humanities advisor before and don't know where to start to look for one, what would you recommend for sources to find someone who could fill that role?
Yeah, I think it always depends project to project. So it'll be thinking about what is the kind of expertise your project needs. We can make recommendations when it comes, or I can here make some recommendations for how to search for advisors who may be coming from that kind of academic background, but also asking around to your peers and colleagues if they have someone or know someone who has that kind of expertise. Looking at past mass humanities projects can also be helpful there. But you can look at local colleges and universities. You could even ask a local librarian who will be, I think, are often great at helping to find exactly those kinds of resources, help you find people and information. You're welcome to let Mass Humanities know what you're looking for. We're not always able to recommend someone, but we can provide guidance in terms of who you might want to look for and what kind of expertise you might best serve your project.
I also had a question about what we consider low cost admission to be.
Mm-hmm. I think we typically are looking for something that is in the under $10 range. Anything that is getting above 10 or 15, we might look for, say, a free day, right? A couple of free opportunities, or an EBT card to culture process where there is access at variable rates.
And then someone asked if they could include video work samples, even if they're not applying for support for a film project.
I think if it is related to the grant project, if there is going to be some kind of film done in the project, or if the film represents work that your organization has done, you are welcome to include that.
And then independent documentary filmmaker, are they required to have a nonprofit attached to the film or a fiscal sponsor?
You can have either. So typically a fiscal sponsor is pretty common for documentary films, although we do know that some documentary film makers have their own independent 501c3s. And
then someone asked if any poetry/storytelling be eligible for funding.
Storytelling poetry falls under the category of creative arts for us for the purpose of this grant. And so that form of storytelling and poetry would not be eligible for this grant.
And then someone asked if they're not exactly clear on the creation of artwork, and what about short documentary film?
We make a distinction between documentary film and other kinds of film that are in the kind of scripted or creative or artistic realm. So documentary film we can fund, but other kinds of film we do not.
And then, sorry, I skipped ahead of one. We're asking if the project is building upon existing materials, if they're going to run into issues, if like that part of the work started before September of 2023.
So as long as the funds that you are seeking from Mass Humanities is supporting work that is happening after the grant period, sharing work you've already done is fine. And so when we talk about budgets tomorrow, we'll go over some of that in a little bit more detail, just thinking about your project budget and what it covers. So you can share work you've already done and just make sure that the funds you're requesting are for work that you are going to do if awarded the grant.
And I have a really specific project question. Someone's looking to put together a collection of stories that highlight their nonprofit's 40 years of working to reduce elder isolation. They plan on interviewing their volunteers, program participants, board members. Everyone has been kind of involved with their mission over the years. Does that sound like an appropriate project for this grant?
I think that sounds like an appropriate project for making an appointment with a program officer and to discuss your project in a little bit more detail. So that's exactly the kind of work that we are happy to do with you as applicants. If something that we've said in this webinar still leaves you with questions, you know, we're here and you can make appointments and we can talk.
And then did you say there are recommended guidelines for interviewing on the website?
So our grant guidelines, if you look at the section on oral histories and storytelling projects, which is at the end of the guidelines, they will point you towards the Oral History Association. And that is a great resource for archivally based oral history projects. So you can find that organization. You'll have the name in the grant guidelines. We don't provide direct links to particular approaches to interviewing because there's so many. So if you want to get started, I think that the Oral History Association is a great place, but there are lots of different processes.
With matching funds, does that include staffing hours to support, like, for example, oral history collecting work, or hours such as like web support or staffing to keep the site open for public sessions as part of, is it matching funds would include staffing costs, I think is what the question is.
Yes, so if you are paying staff for anything that is directly related to the project out of your own funds or another grant, that is all part of your match.
And someone's asking for a copy of the slides.
Mm-hmm. Great, we are working to make them available and accessible to everyone. Really available.
And then someone asked if historical storytelling projects would be eligible.
I mean, my sense is broadly yes. I think again that might be something to talk with the program officer about in more detail. What you're thinking of in terms of historical storytelling. Yeah.
And I've caught up with the chat.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think what I will do is just say if there's anyone who wasn't able to put something in the chat or wants to ask a question just by raising their hand and unmuting, we can do that now too. So I see a hand raised and it looks like it's Lewis.
Yes, I don't know if I heard the answer. I had two questions. One was letters of support. We have multiple letters of support, but I think the upload feature only allows one. Can we just write out in the document who we got them from? Because some PDF letters of support you can't copy and paste.
Mhm. Yeah, if you're able to combine them on your own computer, and there are a couple, and they're also online, you can find sites that will do the combining of PDFs for you if you can't do that on your home computer, but they do need to be all put into one document. The other thing you can do is always print and scan. That's another way to do it. So you print out all of your letters and then scan them into a single document. That also works. They do all need to be kind of combined and uploaded so that they are one document. Does that answer your question?
Yes, my other question was, if we have a volunteer staff person, can we assign a value to their work in terms of the match?
Yeah, so that would be considered an in-kind match, and this we'll talk about tomorrow as well. But yeah, so you would value their work at a rate and then include it as your in-kind match, in-kind being volunteer matching, as opposed to anything where money changes hand, which is a cash match.
Thank you.
I see a question about how to make an appointment with the program officer. So we may have dropped this in the chat already, but if we haven't, we can try to get it in there. But also, if you look in our grant guidelines, you will see links to a Calendly, which is a scheduling platform. And so if you click on one of those links, it will show you when I'm available or my colleagues Jen or Toya are available. And you can just start looking for a time that matches yours. There they go. They're in the chat now. So you can book an appointment there and then have a conversation with us.
Hello. I
Oh,
have
sorry.
my hand
Yeah,
raised.
I missed you. Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry, 10 minutes in, you had said something about higher ed. I'm at UMass Dartmouth. Would you, I'm sorry I didn't catch it. Would you be able to repeat that?
Sure. So I mentioned higher ed when I was talking about eligibility requirements, and I can come back to it. Essentially, what I was mentioning is that higher education institutions can have more than one grant open at a time if those grants are for different institutes or departments at the college or university. Right? So this requirement, this eligibility note right here.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's great to be able to answer a question. So I think what I will do is I like to set a timer for about a minute and see if we get any other questions. And then if not, we can wrap up the webinar, but I'll make sure we give ourselves a minute to think through any questions that might be coming in.
There's a question in the chat about if the slides and the recording will be shared afterwards,
Yeah.
which we will.
Yeah, we will make the recording available on our website. The same place where you probably click the registration for this, you'll be able to see a link to the videos. That brings us to a minute, and we will talk about budgets tomorrow, so get out your calculators. We will do a little bit of math. And hope we are able to see you tomorrow. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for coming, and a great afternoon.